Hello to everyone listening from around the world. Today's account comes from Jonathan Reed, 54, who shared what happened when he sat through a dinner conversation he was not supposed to understand, and responded in perfect German before the check arrived. This account has been dramatized to protect privacy. AI narration is used throughout. The experience it describes is real. The wine was a 2019 Burgundy, probably $400. Stefan had ordered it without looking at the menu, the way men do when they are performing ease for an audience, and want the audience to notice. I noticed. I poured a glass. I held it the way you hold wine when you're a man who married a woman, who taught herself to love wine and who taught you, by proximity, to recognize the difference between a bottle that is trying to impress and a bottle that simply is impressive. This one was trying. Everything in this room is trying, I thought. The restaurant was Kindred, on South Main Street in Davidson, North Carolina, about 20 minutes north of Charlotte. The kind of place with exposed brick and a seasonal menu, and the particular ambient warmth of somewhere that has decided it is special and has managed to be right about it. Melissa had suggested it. I had driven. Stefan had arrived first, already seated, already comfortable in the corner booth with his jacket off, and his shirt sleeves rolled to the mid-forearm in the way of a man who has decided the social contract does not entirely apply to him. He was 46, well-maintained, the kind of face that photographs well and is somewhat less interesting in person. My name is Jonathan Reed. I am 54 years old, and I have been married to Melissa for 11 years. And I have been quietly studying German for 2 of them. I want to explain the German. In 2022, Melissa's company, a commercial interiors firm in Charlotte called Hartwell Design Group, was acquired by a Stuttgart-based parent company. Stefan came with the acquisition. He was the European Division Director in Charlotte on a rotating 18-month assignment. He spoke English well but preferred German in internal meetings, which Melissa had begun attending, and which had prompted Melissa to start taking German lessons. I thought this was interesting. I have always found language interesting. I was a high school history teacher for 22 years. Before I moved into curriculum development for a regional education nonprofit, and languages, the way they carry culture, the way they reveal thinking, have always been something I pay attention to, so I started studying. Quietly. Not as a project I announced, but as something I did in the mornings before Melissa woke up. Using a combination of Duolingo, a structured textbook series I ordered from a bookseller on North College Street in Charlotte, and a conversation partner I found through the Goethe Institute's online program, a retired teacher in Frankfurt named Petra, who Skyped with me twice a week and was unfailingly patient with my grammar. Melissa knew I was doing something with the laptop in the mornings. She assumed it was the news. I let her assume. This was not strategic at the time. It was just the quiet practice of a person who learns better without an audience, who had always done his most interesting work without announcing it first. I had no reason, in 2022, to believe that this specific fact, Jonathan speaks German now, was going to matter in any particular way. I was wrong about that. The dinner had been Melissa's idea, a team dinner, she called it. Stefan was leaving for Stuttgart in 3 weeks and she wanted to do something collegial. She asked if I'd come. I said yes. I did not tell her I had been studying the language of the man across the table for 2 years and could follow a conversation at approximately 70 to 80% comprehension, which is enough. More than enough, as it turned out. The first hour was pleasant in the way that dinners with people you don't fully trust are pleasant. Surface level, careful, the conversation staying in safe shallows. Stefan asked about my work. I told him about the nonprofit. He nodded with the specific quality of nod that indicates polite non-interest. Melissa translated a few things unnecessarily. Stefan's English was excellent, and laughed too readily at his observations. Anne touched her water glass when she was nervous, which she always does. I watched all of this the way I watch most things, quietly, specifically. The main courses arrived somewhere around 8:45 p.m. The conversation shifted. Stefan began speaking to Melissa in German. Not to me, to her, the way you speak across a table to someone when you have decided the third person at the table is not in the conversation. I kept my expression relaxed, interested but uncomprehending, the face of a man who is content to eat his food while the adults talk. I am going to remember every word of this, I thought. What Stefan said, in German, translated accurately, was, "Does he suspect anything?" Melissa looked at me. I was cutting my steak. I did not look up. She looked back at Stefan. No, she said, in German. He's too trusting. He always has been. Stefan picked up his wine. And the pregnancy? He said. Melissa's hand moved to her stomach. It was a small, automatic gesture, the kind that is not performed but happens. She was 11 weeks. I had been to the first appointment. I had held her hand in the waiting room and looked at the ultrasound and felt what I had assumed was the specific warmth of a man who is going to be a father for the first time at 54. I had assumed a number of things, Melissa said in German, in a voice that was quiet and conversational and completely unguarded. Don't worry, the idiot is so happy about the pregnancy. He will raise your son thinking it's his. The restaurant continued around us. A server passed. The wine was poured. I set down my knife. I picked up my glass. I looked at the wine, and then I looked at Stefan. And I said, in German, carefully, clearly, in the specific register that Petra had spent 2 years helping me develop, I said, I appreciate you both speaking slowly. My grammar is still inconsistent with the subjunctive mood, but my comprehension is quite good. The table went very quiet. Stefan's face did the thing that faces do when the geometry of a room changes without warning. A rapid, involuntary recalibration, the expression of someone who has been confident and is suddenly not. Melissa's hand was still on her stomach. She was looking at me like she had never seen me before, which in a specific sense, she hadn't. Good, I thought. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these accounts had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I finished my wine. I set the glass down with the particular care of a person managing the space between what they feel and what they show. The burgundy is excellent, I told Stefan in English now. Thank you for choosing it. Stefan looked at me. He looked at Melissa. He looked at his plate. Jonathan, Melissa started. Don't, I told her, quietly, without drama, the single word that is not an argument but an end. She closed her mouth. I signaled to the server. I asked for the check. I took out my wallet, placed my card on the tray before the check even arrived. The gesture of a man who is not staying for dessert and would like to be efficient about leaving. And I sat in that booth in Kindred on South Main Street in Davidson, North Carolina, for the remaining 7 minutes it took to process the payment, with the specific stillness of a man who has understood something completely and is now deciding what to do about it. Stefan did not speak for those 7 minutes. Melissa did not speak. The wine was finished. The check cleared. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and looked at both of them. Guten Abend, I said. Good evening. I walked out into the October night on South Main Street, and I got in my car, and I sat in the parking lot for 6 minutes, and I breathed. And then I drove south on I-77 back into Charlotte, and I called my attorney, and when she picked up, I said, Helen, I know it's late. I need to talk tonight. Helen Morse has been my attorney for 9 years. She said, I'll put on coffee. Come now. That was the last night I was in the dark about anything. Helen's office is on South Tryon Street in Uptown Charlotte, on the 18th floor of a building that has the specific institutional weight of a place where difficult things are handled without sentiment. She had coffee ready. She had a legal pad. She had the expression of a woman who has heard many things and maintained her composure through all of them. I told her everything. The dinner, the German, the exact words, which I recited in both languages because that is how I had processed them on the drive. In German first, as I heard them, and then in English, as they meant. Helen wrote continuously. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she looked at her notes. You're certain of the translation, she said. Yes, I told her. How certain? Certain enough to put it in a sworn statement. She looked at me. Jonathan, how long have you been studying German? 2 years, I said. Helen looked at her legal pad. She wrote something. And this dinner was in a public restaurant, she said. Other people in the vicinity. The booth behind us had 2 people in it, I told her. At least one of whom, based on his reaction when I spoke, also spoke German. He was approximately 50, Gray jacket, alone for most of the meal, reading something on his phone when we sat down. When I spoke, he looked up. Helen underlined something. "I'd like to find him," she said. Here is what Helen told me over the next 2 hours, and what I want you to understand because it is important. Evidence in a divorce proceeding does not need to meet criminal standards. What it needs to do is paint a complete, documented picture that supports the claims being made. My claims were the following. First, that Melissa had been engaged in an ongoing relationship with Stefan outside of our marriage. Second, that the child she was carrying may not be mine, and that paternity testing would be required. Third, that the statement she made at the dinner, "He will raise your son thinking it's his," demonstrated both knowledge of the situation and intent to deceive, which was relevant to questions of fraud within the marriage contract. Helen explained that in North Carolina, adultery is a recognized ground for divorce and can affect alimony determinations. It does not affect child custody or property division directly, but it is relevant context. The paternity question was separate and would be addressed through standard legal process, a request for paternity testing, which the court would typically grant given the circumstances. "The dinner conversation," Helen said. "Your account of it is hearsay until we can corroborate it." "I know," I told her. "Do you have anything else?" she asked. I had been waiting for this question. For 6 weeks before the dinner, I had suspected. Not known. Suspected. There had been a series of small things, a pattern of late evenings, the particular quality of Melissa's attention when her phone buzzed, a hotel charge on a credit card statement that was attributed to a work event I could not find any record of in her company calendar. None of it was definitive, all of it was noted. "I have 6 weeks of documented observations," I told Helen. "Written down, dated, kept in a file on my home computer. Times, dates, discrepancies, nothing that proves anything by itself, but as a pattern." "As a pattern," Helen said. "It corroborates the picture." She set down her pen. "You've been building a case." "I've been paying attention," I said. "There's a difference." Helen almost smiled. "Not always," she said. Helen filed the divorce petition on October 22nd, 4 days after the dinner. She filed it as a contested divorce on grounds of adultery, with a request for paternity testing attached as a secondary motion. I moved to a furnished apartment on North Davidson Street, the Noda neighborhood, which I had always liked for its murals and its coffee shops and its specific quality of being a place where people are in the middle of becoming something rather than already arrived. On October 23rd. I did not tell Melissa I was moving until the morning of, when I came back to the house on Rhea Road in South Charlotte to collect 2 suitcases and the box of German textbooks from the closet in the second bedroom. Melissa was in the kitchen when I came in. She was wearing a robe. She had not been sleeping well. I could see it in her face. She looked at the suitcases. "Jonathan," she said, "we should talk." "We should," I agreed, "but through attorneys." She looked at the box of textbooks. "How long?" she asked. "How long did you know?" "Oh, I didn't know, Dia," I told her. "I suspected." The dinner confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean to." She started. "Idiot," I said, quietly, not angry, precise. "That's the word you used. Idiot. I want you to know that I heard it clearly. My German is quite good." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. I picked up the suitcases. "Take care of yourself," I told her. "And the baby." I meant it. Both parts. I walked out. The complication arrived 11 days after the filing. Melissa's attorney, a man named Gary Whitfield, who had a reputation in Charlotte family law circles as someone who worked aggressively on procedural grounds, filed a motion arguing that my account of the dinner conversation was inadmissible as a basis for the adultery claim. His argument was that the conversation was between Melissa and Stefan, that I had no documentation of it beyond my own recall, and that my translation of a private conversation in a foreign language could not be verified and therefore should not form the basis of any legal filing. Helen called me when the motion arrived. "They're challenging the dinner," she said. "Expected," I told her. "They're arguing it's unverifiable hearsay," she said. "Find the man in the gray jacket," I told her. Helen was already on it. "If you've been listening for a while and want accounts like this to keep coming, it really helps when you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you. For real. Finding the man in the gray jacket took 11 days. Helen retained a private investigator named Pete, who worked from my description and the restaurant's reservation records for the night of October 18th. The booth behind us had been reserved under a name that Pete traced to a man named Walter Braun, 52 years old, a structural engineer from Frankfurt who was in Charlotte on a consulting project for a construction firm in Ballantine. Walter Braun spoke German as his first language. Pete made contact with him on November 2nd. Walter, to his credit and to my considerable relief, was willing to speak with Helen directly. His account of the dinner conversation matched mine in every material detail. Helen filed Walter's sworn statement with the court on November 5th. Gary Whitfield withdrew the hearsay motion on November 7th. I heard this news in my apartment on North Davidson Street, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a German grammar workbook I had been reviewing not for any particular reason, but because the habit of morning study had become something I didn't want to lose. Petra would be pleased, I thought. I texted her, in German. She responded with a single word, ausgezeichnet, excellent. What 2 years of mornings builds. That is the title of the notebook I have been keeping since November. Not a diary. I am not a diary person. A record. Observations, dates, decisions made, and why. The kind of document that a history teacher writes instinctively because history is, at its core, the record of what people chose to do and what happened as a result. The divorce was finalized in March. North Carolina requires a 1-year separation for an absolute divorce, but Helen had filed for legal separation immediately, and the adultery finding, supported by Walter's statement, by the pattern documentation from the 6 weeks prior to the dinner, and by Stefan's eventual deposition, which I will get to, accelerated several of the ancillary proceedings. The paternity test was conducted in December. The results were what the dinner had suggested they would be. I am not the biological father of the child Melissa was carrying. I want to say something about this plainly, because it is the part of this story that people will focus on, and it deserves to be said clearly. The child is not responsible for any of this. The child is innocent. My grief about the situation was genuine, and it was specific. Not grief that I would not be raising this particular child, but grief about the version of my life that I had believed I was living, which turned out to be a version that had been constructed for me by someone else. That grief is real. It does not require drama to be acknowledged. Stefan's deposition was conducted in January, in a conference room at Helen's firm on South Tryon Street. Stefan had returned to Stuttgart in November as scheduled, but the deposition was conducted via video link with a certified court interpreter present, a formality since Stefan's English was excellent, but required for the record. Stefan had retained his own attorney in Germany. The deposition lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Stefan confirmed that he and Melissa had been in a relationship for approximately 8 months. He confirmed that the dinner on October 18th had taken place and that the conversation described in my sworn statement and Walter Braun's sworn statement had occurred. He stated that he had not known, prior to that evening, the full nature of what Melissa had planned, meaning the specific element of raising the child as mine. Gary Whitfield, representing Melissa, objected to several questions. Helen pushed through most of them. At the end of the deposition, Stefan looked directly at the camera. Herr Reed, he said, Mr. Reed, in German, which was the language he had been speaking for most of the 2 hours. Ich bitte um Entschuldigung, I apologize. I was not in the room. Helen told me about it that evening. I sat with it for a while. What did you say? I asked her. Nothing, Helen said. It was on the record. That was enough. The settlement. I will not give you every number, but I will give you the shape of it, because the shape matters. And because this story is, in part, about what happens when you have spent 11 years building a life and then discover the foundation was compromised. The house on Rhea Road, which we had purchased together in 2018 with a down payment that came substantially from my savings, was sold. The proceeds were divided per the settlement. Melissa's attorney negotiated for a larger portion based on her pregnancy and the anticipated single-parent circumstances. Helen negotiated against this on several grounds, including the adultery finding and the 6-week pattern documentation. The final split was not equal. It was not what Gary Whitfield initially wanted. It was what the documented record supported. I kept the car. I kept my retirement accounts, which were in my name alone. I kept the German textbooks. Melissa kept the things she had brought into the marriage and several things she had acquired during it. Stefan, for his part, had acknowledged paternity and was subject to a support arrangement. Through international family law proceedings that Helen coordinated with a Stuttgart-based family law firm, a process that was complicated and slow and is still, as of this writing, working its way through the relevant channels. I moved from the furnished apartment on North Davidson Street into a smaller house in the Dilworth neighborhood in February. A 1940s bungalow on East Kingston Avenue with good light in the mornings and a yard that the previous owner had planted carefully and that I am, slowly, learning to maintain. Petra sends me gardening vocabulary in German sometimes. I did not ask her to do this. She simply decided it was useful and began. She is not wrong. I want to tell you about the Tuesday morning in April when I was sitting at the kitchen table in the Dilworth house with coffee and the grammar workbook. Working through the past perfect tense, a form of expressing completed past actions that German handles with elegant precision, when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. German area code. I answered. Herr Reed? A man's voice. Careful. Hier ist Walter Braun. It's Walter Braun. I set down the workbook. Walter, I said, in German. Guten Morgen. He said good morning. He said he had thought about the situation many times since November. He said he hoped things had resolved reasonably. He said he was going to be in Charlotte again in June on the same consulting project and asked if I would like to have coffee. I said yes. We spoke for 12 minutes. His German was, obviously, significantly better than mine. He was patient about it. At the end of the call, he said, "Your German is quite good, you know, for someone who taught himself." I had a good teacher, I told him. The woman in Frankfurt? He asked. Petra, I said. She was very patient. All good teachers are, Walter said. He hung up. I sat at the kitchen table in the April morning light, and I looked at the grammar workbook, and I thought about 2 years of mornings, the lamp on in the kitchen before dawn, the Skyped grammar sessions with Petra, the slow, quiet accumulation of a language that nobody in my immediate life knew I was learning, that I had never announced. That had simply been something I was doing because I found it interesting, and because language is one of the ways a person expands their understanding of how the world works. I had not studied German in order to catch my wife at a dinner table. I had studied German because it was worth knowing. The dinner table was simply where it turned out to matter. That is the thing I want to leave you with, because this story is not fundamentally about a marriage that ended badly, though it is that. It is not fundamentally about a betrayal, though it is that too. It is about what happens when you invest in yourself quietly and without expectation of immediate return, when you do the work because the work is worth doing, without knowing yet what it will produce. Contempt requires certainty. The person doing the contempting has to be certain that the object of their contempt cannot respond, cannot understand, cannot see what is being done. That certainty is almost always based on what they have been shown, not on what is true. Melissa was shown a version of me, the version that did not speak German, that would not understand the conversation she was having across the table, that would go home happy from the dinner and none the wiser. That version was the one she had decided I was. The version that woke up at 5:30 every morning with a textbook was not a version she had thought to look for. The contempt she felt was real. The mistake she made was allowing that contempt to become certainty. I am not telling you to study German, though German is excellent and Petra charges reasonable rates. I am telling you that the things you do quietly, for their own sake, without announcing them, without performing them, those things accumulate. They build something. And when the moment comes where what you have built is needed, it is there. 2 years of mornings, the past perfect tense. Hatte keine Ahnung. He had no idea. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered account like this.